In this next section, we're just going to learn how to solve polynomial and rational inequalities. So if you have a polynomial, f of x equals x minus 8 squared times x plus 9 times f of x plus 9, it's already in factored form. What if you want to solve that it's less, where is it less than 0, and give the answer in inequality notation. So let's copy it again. So 1a, I have x minus 8 squared times x plus 9, 7x plus 9 less than 0. So how we're going to solve this polynomial inequality is we're going to set up a table and test points. So in the first row of the table, I'm going to put the x-intercepts. So what are the x-intercepts? Well, the first one is negative 9. So let's say negative infinity is here. So let's say negative 9 is here. And then from this one, I get that the x-intercept is negative 9/7. And then from this one, I get that x equals 8. And then here I have positive infinity. All right, so the next row, we're going to put x minus 8. We're going to put the signs of x minus 8 in this row. So x minus 8 equals 0 when x is 8, so I'm going to put 0 in here. And then for numbers less than 8, this is going to be negative, because if it's negative 9, I'll have negative 9 minus 8, so it's going to give me a negative number. So I'm just going to put the negative sign, and for numbers greater than 8, it's going to be positive. Alright, in the next row, we're going to put the factor x minus 8 squared, because that's what we have. So x minus 8 squared, you can think about it, well, on this portion, what's a negative number squared? A negative number squared means a negative times itself, so it's going to give me positive. And then 0 squared is 0, and then a positive number squared, so plus squared is still plus. So this is the sign of x minus 8 squared, which is not surprising because it's always a positive quantity, or 0 when x is 8. Now we're going to look at the next term, x plus 9. This factor, x plus 9, is going to be 0 and x is negative 9, so I'm going to put the 0 in here, and it's going to be minus, it's always the opposite sign of x, so if x is positive, to the left of x is going to be minus, and to the right of negative 9 is going to be, to the right of 0 is going to be positive. And then my next term is 7x plus 9. So in this row, 7x plus 9 is 0 when x is negative 9/7. So I'm going to put 0 for negative 9/7. And then before, it's going to be the opposite sign of x, which is negative, and then positive. And then finally, in the last row, we're actually going to put our whole polynomial. So in the last row, I'm going to have x minus 8 squared times x plus 9 times 7x plus 9. So basically, what am I doing? I am multiplying these last three rows. X minus 8 squared times x plus 9 times x plus 9. And I'm going to put the result, the sign of the result, in this resulting. So again, I am just multiplying these three rows together. So a positive times a negative times a negative, this is going to give me a positive. On this fence right here, it's a positive number times 0 times a negative number. Well, that's just 0. Now I have a positive times a negative. This is going to give me a negative. And then I have a positive number times a positive number times 0. This is going to give me 0. Next, I'm going to have a positive times a positive times a positive. So this is going to give me positive. On the fence right here, it's going to give me 0. And then for the remainder, I have a positive times a positive times a positive, so it's positive. So now we're going to read our answer from the last row. So where is this less than 0? This quantity right here less than 0? Well, I can see that the answer, it's less than 0 on this interval. So my polynomial is less than 0 from x is -9 to x is -9/7. And it's strictly less than 0, so I can't include 0, so it's going to be parentheses on both ends. If it was less than or equal to 0, then I would have put in brackets. Or if the polynomial inequality we had to solve was greater than 0, then we would have chosen as the answer this interval, and then this interval, and then this interval. So to solve a polynomial inequality, we just set up this table and we get the answer. These polynomial inequalities are going to be in handy when we want to find domains of functions. So I know that, for example, if I want to find the domain of the function square root of this quantity, I know that this quantity has to be greater than or equal to 0. So to find the domain of f is going to come down to finding the solution for the polynomial inequality x squared times 21 minus 20x minus 1 greater than or equal to 0. So to do that, so the domain of f is going to be x squared, the solution to x squared times 21 minus 20x minus 1 greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so the issue with this one is that it's not in factored form, so we have to bring it in factor form to be able to do all of this, to find the intercepts. So I'm going to distribute the x squared, so it's going to be 21x squared minus 20x cubed minus 1. And to factor this, I'm going to, first let's write it as negative 20x cubed plus 21x squared minus 1. So this one is kind of tricky because I want to factor this. So how we're going to do this, I'm going to write 21x squared as 20x squared plus x squared. 20x squared plus x squared is 21x squared. So then I will have my polynomial is going to turn into negative 20x cubed plus 20x squared plus x squared minus 1. So the only thing I did, I rewrote 21x squared. So this is, if you remember from college algebra, this is factoring by grouping now. So what can I factor between the first two terms now and then between the last two terms? So I can factor 20x squared from, actually a negative 20x squared from the first two terms. So negative 20x squared, what do I have left from the first? Well, I just have a x left because negative 20x squared times x is going to be negative 20x cubed. And then what do I have left in here? It's just a minus 1. And plus x squared minus 1 can factor in x minus 1 times x plus 1. So now I can factor the x minus 1, and I'll have x minus 1 and then negative 20x squared plus what's left from the second one, plus x plus 1. So now if I factor this quadratic, I will get my factored form. So there's a lot going on in here. So far I have x minus 1 times negative 20x squared plus x, what happened here? Plus x plus 1. So I want this to be greater than or equal to 0 because it was underneath the square root. If I factor a negative, I can factor a negative 1, and then I'll have x squared minus x, 20x squared minus x minus 1. So I can pull out the negative in front, And then I can factor 20x squared minus x minus 1. The factors are going to be, with two numbers multiplied together give me 20. I'm going to have 4x and 5x, because 4x times 5x is 20x squared. And that's going to give me a -1 and a +1. So you can FOIL this and see that it will equal to that. Greater than or equal to 0. So finally, I have it in factored form. Now I can set up my table and get the answer. So the x-intercepts are -1/5 from this one. And then I have a 1/4 from this one. And then I have a 1 from this one. Okay, now we're going to put the sign of x minus 1. So x minus 1 is 0 when x is 1. And it's going to be negative before 0 and positive. And then let's actually group this negative with the x minus 1. So negative x minus 1 is going to be, well, it's 0 here, so it's going to be the opposite. When I do negative a negative number, that's going to give me positive. And then this is negative. It just flipped the sign. And then we're going to put the factor 4x minus 1. 4x minus 1 is 0 and x is 1/4. Minus before and plus after. And then 5x plus 1, this factor. This one is 0 when x is -1/5. And it's negative before and positive after. Now in the last row, I'm going to put the whole thing. So negative x minus 1 times 4x minus 1 times 5x plus 1. So I'm going to look at these last three rows and I'm going to multiply them all together. So a positive times a negative gives me a positive. When I have 0, I must have a 0 here. A positive times a positive is a negative. When I have a 0, the answer is going to be 0. A positive times a positive is positive. A 0 times a positive is a 0. And then a negative times a positive is a negative. So now to get the answer, where is this greater than or equal to 0? Well, it's greater than or equal to 0 here and here. And it includes equals. So we're going to say that the domain of f is -infinity to whatever my x is, -1/5 bracket, because it can be equal to 0, union 1/4 to 1. And that's the answer. So you see how finding the domain of a function turned into solving a polynomial inequality. So this is A and B. In the next video, we're going to go over solving rational inequalities.